All right. Good health and welcome to today's edition of Black Doctor Speaks, which is a dedicated space where we explore complex health issues that impact the African American community. Today, we're talking about the complexities of food allergies within the Black community, particularly among our children. In this episode, we lay the foundation for an enlightening series discussing why this topic is so crucial. And what we aim to achieve is understanding of food allergies, its impact on Black children. Our special guest today is Mr. Thomas Silvera. He has a story to tell. And I turn that over to our co-host, Dr. Renee. Dr. Renee, it's up to you.
Hi. So I'm so excited. So Thomas Silvera, I met him actually a few years ago, but I heard his story and did a blog post about it. And his wife actually DM'd me when I was promoting my post, and that's how we got connected. And so his story is amazing. So please share with us your story of how food allergies affected you and your family.
Okay. Thank you again, Dr. Lenore, for having me here. Dr. Renee, I appreciate you guys having me on this platforms to share my story. So I can say, well, I've been sharing this story so much, it's still always brand new to me for sharing it. So my son, Elijah Alavi, was such a vibrant, loving boy. Like many parents, we entrusted his childcare center and believing that they would provide a safe space for him in terms of like having a nurturing environment. So Elijah had severe allergies to dairy, which was well documented and communicated with the childcare center. But unfortunately, on November 3rd, 2017, despite all clear instructions and precautions, he was given a grilled cheese sandwich by an educator that was watching over him. And this seemingly simple oversight, as they call it, led to him having a severe allergic reaction. The childcare staff there failed to recognize the signs and symptoms of the anaphylaxis and did not administer his epinephrine, did not call his mother right away or 911. And by that time, he was taken to Harlem Hospital, which was the local hospital close by, and it was already too late for that. And we lost my son. So losing Elijah was one of the most devastating experience I think any parent will experience. But within that, it ignited a fierce determination, like within me, within his mother, to just prevent this from happening to any other family ever again. And we created the Elijah Alavi Foundation, named in honor of him and in memory of him, to work on advocacy, education, and awareness and policy change across the nation. You know, we capture that by just working with so many people here today.
So it's very impressive. Do you know how many states you guys have been able to get the policy changes in?
Yeah, so we started off with the advocacy efforts in New York State. And on September 12, 2019, we enacted our first law called Elijah's Law, which was named after my son Elijah. It was a mandated law in New York State, and it just created a precedence of how things should be done within every childcare center, not just in New York, but across the nation. So we started with New York, then we had a bill that was passed in Illinois, Virginia. That was 3 bills that we had at the time. We got a city ordinance in Kansas City. We also have a component of Elijah's Law attached to an epinephrine bill in Connecticut. And we also just passed a law in Maryland, I believe about a week or two ago. We enacted Elijah's Law. So you could say about 4.5, 5 around that time. It all sounds great. You know, yeah, we got these laws passed, but there's so much work behind it that needs to be done in order for it to fulfill everything that is said within the legislation.
Yeah, so you got to get the education on the signs and the symptoms, which Dr. Lenore can talk about, of anaphylaxis, and then also, of course, how to administer, because some people are like, well, what do you mean? You know, epinephrine auto injector, how does it work? That, and just having that. You guys had an.
Yeah, before we go too far into the discussion of the laws, tell us a little bit more about your son.
About Elijah? Oh man.
And how he was diagnosed, how he presented with his allergies, and how he was diagnosed.
So I have another son named Sebastian. He's my first one. He has multiple food allergies as well. He's good. He's thriving. But my son Elijah, um, he started being affected by his food allergies at a very young age, which he was rejecting his mother's breast milk. Then soon on, every food introduction that was given to him, he had an allergic reaction to. On top of that, he was also diagnosed with, you can't diagnose asthma at an early age, so it was undiagnosed respiratory disorder. So him having the undiagnosed respiratory disorder, the food allergies, and we know how food allergies and the respiratory disorders just come hand in hand. And it creates that ticking time bomb of we don't want to experience. So he had several anaphylactic reactions over time, which a scary thing is to administer epinephrine. But to talk about my son Elijah, we'll be talking about how beautiful the sky is, how bright the sun is, how green the grass is. That's how beautiful he was. And I love everything about it, what he embodied, what we tend to continue giving back to our community because of his vibrant energy is what we want to give back to him. And knowing that he had multiple food allergies and asthma at the time we had to make sure he was like protected.
Unfortunately, what happens to you happens to too many African American children.
Correct.
How did you finally make the diagnosis of what he was actually allergic to?
So the diagnosis, I mean, I have food allergies as well. But again, when we talk about food allergies, we went to his primary care physician. And at that time, you go to the ER for the first experience. And then it was like, okay, we'll go talk to your primary care physician. Nothing was really given to us to kind of like follow through on what he was experiencing. So we had to go to the primary care physician. We are living in Harlem, middle-class family, but in underserved community. So a lot of the information is not privy to us. So we have to go outside of our insurance network in order to retrieve that information. So paying out of pocket to see an allergist to determine what type of food my son Elijah was allergic to. So Elijah was allergic to multiples, I think a little over 10 allergens. So, and one of them being dairy on the high note was one of the ones that was severe. It was dairy, eggs, peanuts, and a couple other garlic, onion. It goes on. So when we talk about, when it comes to that community and Black children are with food allergies, face like, dealing with that in the community is like they're faced with severe, unique challenges. And first and foremost, they're often lack of awareness and understanding about food allergies in these communities, which leads to severe delayed diagnosis. And a lot of these kids go to the primary care physicians or ER with these undiagnosed conditions from either it can be like their stomach or other respiratory issues and being diagnosed differently. So it's like, and I talk about this all the time, it's like not having the access of food allergy management and healthcare access plays a big part on especially you're talking about young Black children or specific communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because not a lot of people know that you should take your child to an allergist to get them diagnosed for the allergies. They have no idea. And so I'm glad that you were able to at least, do that. But unfortunately, there's just not enough allergists to go around, not enough Black allergists to go around. And unfortunately, primary care physicians, the pediatrician, the ER, they don't have allergy tests to administer. So how would you get to this diagnosis?
It's kind of paradoxical because we lived on 125th and Lenox for 25 years.
Oh, wow.
And Harlem Hospital had one of the best Black allergists in the country. And he was in charge of both pediatric section. The problem is that the symptoms of food allergy and the sophisticated way in which you have to hone down on it is just not a sense of awareness within our community. And I think that that's one of the things, obviously, that you were up against.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm an educated man.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, was very educated. We both made sure, not just in terms of education academically, but we educated ourselves. We had to educate ourselves on food allergies and asthma. We weren't given like the resources, and here's the communities to reach out to give you the information and understanding. So we felt alone. You know, it was like we felt alone, and we felt like who else has food allergies? It was hard to find that kind of like niche
Yeah.
community. It wasn't until my son passed away where the floodgates opened and everybody was coming in, and I was like, they do exist. Unfortunately, is using that term, but you know, the food
Yeah.
allergy community does exist. But one thing that doesn't really exist is there's a very short community when it comes to Black families with food allergies or asthma. It's
Yeah.
because of the prevalence of it. Although we are at higher rate of having food allergies in Amazon based off the communities we live in and so forth, and economical, socioeconomical conditions, it's not talked about. You know, the community is not talked about. So it's like we were being open about it, but we couldn't find that connection.
Yeah.
So dealing with our primary care physician and an allergist, it's like a one and done. You have to keep kind
Yeah.
of there, and then it stresses out financial. You know, it becomes a financial.
Exactly.
So epinephrine, allergist, medications, like it's a, I don't know. I can call it's a cluster. I'll leave it at
Right.
Well, yeah, your frustration is shared by many, many parents. Like I say, as a Black allergist, I see children who are on the cusp of very serious problems, like you have. And the problem is that the primary care doc, for a number of different reasons, sees our symptoms somewhat differently. I'm not saying that they would selectively select symptoms for white children than they wouldn't for Black, but there's a certain thing called unconscious bias. And if you don't have the resources within the community, then the diagnosis is relatively complicated to make because it does require a number of things we'll talk about in just a minute. But tell us a little bit about your focus on epinephrine, because that's really where the rubber meets the road in trying to save Black children and other children with serious food allergies and anaphylaxis.
I think the focus on epinephrine when it comes to you talking about the Black community or any like underserved community, it comes down to the financial burden of it. Because you have Black families, and I've done community work where a mom will come up to me and be like, "Hey, I have 3 children with food allergies, but only could afford a set of epinephrine. So they have to give one to the school and keep one in their pocket." So now you got to look at the ethical standard considerations in the event of both. Imagine 2 childs having an anaphylaxis. You only have 1 epinephrine pen. Who are you going to save first? So you look at those ethical standards, like how that messes with a parent's psyche. That's pretty serious. So with us dealing with that cost, it's like I'm lucky there are laws being passed currently that are capping epinephrine, but it's still a financial burden if you can't afford it, whether it's $50 or $100.
Right. Or 600 or whatever. Yeah.
It's still a financial burden for the specific communities. If you don't have the money to get to your doctor's appointment, you don't have the money to get your epinephrine. And that's why it's like, unless they make epinephrine free for all, and I know under certain insurance you can get the epinephrine for free, but you can't get it multiple times. You can only get it at that moment, and then wait possibility for that other refill to come in and so forth before you can get it again. But then you leave the vulnerability open when it comes to your kids being in school or a kid being at home and someone, you know, God forbid, if anyone has an allergic reaction and go into an anaphylactic shock. So how is epinephrine administered? My focus is like, hopefully there can be an understanding where they don't, you know, have any financial burdens, where epinephrine can be accessible for free, even possibly over the counter, where it's at cost, which is not, it's going to, you know, spend so much money on that. But it all comes down to legislation. In order for us to make things happen, we have to change legislation. And it's a daunting type situation, but it's daunting, it's cumbersome, but we can, you know, I know in due time it can happen.
So there is an EpiPen Act that last week when I was in DC, that's what one of the bills that we were working on. And it's EpiPen. I always have to tell people EpiPen is actually a brand. It's an epinephrine auto injector because I actually have Avacue.
Yeah.
But EpiPen Act is actually an acronym. Can't remember what it stands for, but that act is to get it so that it's capped at $60.
Yeah.
And so hopefully that will pass. But these things seem to take a very long time because last year we were talking about a bill that we were talking about again this year. So these things take time, unfortunately. But there is an act that is trying to cap it at $60, which is still not cheap, but it's better than in the hundreds.
it's interesting because when it comes to anything in terms of legislation, it all comes down to the financial implications.
Yep.
Who's going to pay for it? When you talk about getting access to epinephrine, you're capping it. But I may be speaking out of the scope of my own practice, but big pharmaceutical is going to have lobbyists to kind of like push against that. That
Yep.
happens all the time in any type of legislation when it comes to medication. So they can make the voluntary considerations, but it's not enacted. So those are the things we have to look at.
Right.
So sometimes that's why some bills sit in legislation or in Congress, because it's like, I don't know who's gonna take on the burden of the cost. When I looked at that, even with my own legislation, even though it's a simple bill, but the financial implications still will kind of like hinder within it.
Yeah, who's gonna educate these people and
Right.
then that recently 2 pharmaceutical companies did cap the cost of inhalers. So that is what gives me a ounce of hope, because when one did it, then a second one came, and then so hopefully, and these are mostly they're rescue inhalers, which is extremely important to an asthmatic. So that is a wonderful thing, because those can cost hundreds of dollars for some people as well. So, so I am very hopeful that this EpiPen Act will go through. But I also, Dr. Lenore, Thomas has a new thing that I wanted him to talk about as we talk about inhalers. Can you tell us about that?
So, our organization also focuses on not just food allergies, but also asthma education and awareness, because of my son Elijah also having asthma. So we started a new initiative called Happyhalers, which I can actually show you one of them right here. This is one of the Happyhalers. What it does, it's a cover that goes over one of the inhalers here, and it kind of like gives children like a peace of mind and feel comfortable walking around or using their inhaler. So it actually has it where you can fit a spacer on it. You can actually use it or play with it at for right now.
Yeah.
So it's for Happyhalers. We actually got so much information that we had to kind of like put everything coming soon, because now we kind of like sent everything kind of like got put out already so quickly. So now we have to wait to rebuild on that. So it's one of our new initiative. We want to focus on asthma education and awareness. It's one of the key things that we want to focus on.
Well, unfortunately, our time for this segment is up, but I think we've covered enough in the first segment of our program to make this a more complete situation. I do promise you that the African American Wellness Project, through all of the platforms that we have, will be a friend to you, and we'll try to amplify not only your message, but the other things that you're doing, both for asthma and anaphylaxis. So thank you very much for the time you've taken with us. And thank you, Dr. Renee, for once again having Mr. Silvera with us. And for those of you who are listening to our podcast, remember what we talked about here. And if your children are having these kinds of symptoms, then find out a certified allergist who can help you with these problems, or contact us at the African American Wellness Project at aawellnessproject.org. And always remember, health is your biggest asset, so protect it. Okay, now we'll go back and do the first part of the show.
Okay.
The first part of the show is a bit more didactic. We're going to ask you about what happened to your son. We're going to ask you about what he, and you can ask with me, Dr. Renee. I'm going to ask about what he finally was allergic to. I'm going to ask about the trouble that you had getting proper evaluations and management. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how food allergies are diagnosed today as opposed to they were even 5 or 6 years ago. So let's start the second. So the first program would be the second one, both of which will air. All right, so let's get started. Let me go back to the introduction again. All right, welcome to today's edition of Black Doctor Speaks, the podcast where complexities of issues that impact the African American community are discussed. Our subject today is food allergy, something that African Americans and Black Americans really don't encounter much in terms of an accurate diagnosis. We have too many of our children with clear symptoms of food allergy that are not managed properly, they're not evaluated even. And in point, I'm getting too wordy. Let me start again.
Okay.
Welcome to today's edition of Black Doctor Speaks. My host, Dr. Renee, and I are here to explore complexities of issues that impact the Black community. Today, we're talking about food allergy, something that the Black community simply does not seem to be able to. Let me try one more time. Welcome to today's edition of Black Doctor Speak. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Mike Lenore, with my co-host, Dr. Renee. We're talking today about food allergies. As you know, in Black Doctor Speak, we try to talk about how issues impact all children and adults, but how they uniquely impact the Black community, because our experience is always different. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Renee, who's going to talk to Mr. Thomas Silvera about the experience he had with his child. And then we'll talk about food allergy in general and what's being done in this day and age. It's different from when he had his experience. And Dr. Renee, it's your turn.
Yes. So, Thomas Silvera, please share with us your story on and how food allergies affected your family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my name is Thomas Silvera. I am the co-founder of the Elijah Alavi Foundation. To give you a little bit of my story, my son Elijah Alavi was such a vibrant, loving boy. Like many parents, myself and his mom, we entrusted in his childcare center, believing that they would provide a safe and nurturing environment for him. But unfortunately, my son had come to his demise on November 3rd, 2017. Elijah had a severe dairy allergy, which was well documented and communicated with the childcare center. And one day, like despite all the clear instructions and the precautions, he was given a grilled cheese sandwich by an educator. This seemingly simple preventative led to him having an allergic reaction. And what hurts and what is very deep is that the childcare staff failed to recognize the signs and symptoms of his anaphylaxis and did not administer epinephrine or call the parent, call his mother, or call 911. And by that time, he was taken to a local hospital in Harlem, where it was too late, and we lost our precious son.
So, what was the? Oh, go ahead.
No.
Okay. So, how was he diagnosed, and what were the hurdles you faced along the way with the diagnosis?
So he was diagnosed probably not until almost close to 1 year of age. So over time, we, and upon discovery with him not being able to ingest his mom's breast milk, he was being lethargic from that, and we understood there was something was wrong. And over time, even introducing him to certain foods, he was having a simple allergic reaction. And then knowing that, we had to administer epinephrine using his brother's epinephrine to administer him. So taking him to the emergency room, and the emergency room was like, oh, he may have an allergic reaction. Using the term may have an allergic reaction, which is kind of, odd for us. But luckily, we are parents who I also suffer with food allergies and also asthma, and so does his mom. So we took him, we followed up with the primary care physician, and it was like, okay, here's an epinephrine. We'll see you later. The communication aspects weren't there. So when we talk about food allergy management and access to healthcare, it wasn't really given to us the way we wanted it. It took us to try to go outside of our insurance carrier and pay money to go see a specialist. And that's when they had to do all the skin testing on him in order to determine what he was actually allergic to.
And so I just want to know, there wasn't an allergist in your network then?
No, and it was the doctor didn't really inform us on like where to go to get the allergist. We had to do our own due diligence and utilize, search engines in order to find our own allergist. We were able to find one not that far, but we had to come out of pocket from our insurance to pay for that.
Yeah, that to me is a little unusual to have an insurance policy that doesn't have access to an allergist. But we see all too often that primary care doctors don't really appreciate the danger that certain foods cause to children. I've been an allergist now for 40 years, and there's never been an allergist near me within 150 miles of me, and a Black allergist. And so when you don't have a Black physician in the community, we're not the only ones that can do a good job. But that community suffers because of lack of interaction between the allergist and the primary care doctors, and for patients themselves. What should have happened and what would happen in this day and age, and I think it's important And I know it's not a good trip down memory lane, but I think it is important for parents to understand if their children are in a similar situation. Is an allergist should have done some evaluations, not only the skin test, but probably some challenge tests as well, to really define what your son was reactive to. There was a time when I first started in practice, I don't want to date myself, when we used to feed infants at 3 to 4 weeks of age. I mean, we didn't really have any trouble with that. But then the American Academy of Pediatrics said, okay, let's watch this and let's wait 6 months. But now we know that if you've got a child who has an allergy, food allergy in the history, it's better to feed them early than late, before the age of 9 months, because it can change the immune system at that particular point in time. Once that diagnosis is made with the exquisite sensitivity your son has, we would start a process of desensitization. And what that means is coming to the office for quite a long time, taking little bits of food under controlled circumstances where the doctor can handle anaphylaxis, and then gradually getting him to the point where he can tolerate small portions and sometimes larger portions of that food. In addition, for older children, there are now a couple of drugs that we can give. Well, the newest study in the New England Journal in the last couple of months suggested that using Olvera on a regular basis will reduce food allergies and certainly can reduce allergy sensitivities. One of the bigger problems we're seeing as we move more quickly to biologics, then we're starting to find that that African Americans are not getting these biologics. Other people should. So I think that there's lots of things that could have been done that weren't done. And I think what we hope is with the message that we're getting now from you today, then other Black families will understand the danger they face with undiagnosed symptoms. Now, you want to say something about what your foundation does. We're going to deal a lot with that in our next segment, but tell us a little bit about your foundation and how the successes that you've had.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, we started the Elijah Alavi Foundation in honor and memory of my son, Elijah Alavi, who, tragically passed due to food allergies. So in 2018, we launched out the organization, and we've been working diligently, grassrooting, and tirelessly. Even in our grief, we were able to push through and work in advocacy and passing legislations in New York, in Illinois, Virginia, Connecticut, Maryland, and we also have several legislations in the pipeline as well. But we don't just focus on legislation. We focus on awareness. We focus on food allergy training. We focus on community advocacy. We focus on community outreach. And our main goal is to make sure we can try to focus in underserved communities and give them the information that is not privy to them. So it's one of the things that's our main focus, because we lived in those, we were raised in those communities, and I understand the health disparities and the lack of health access is not given to us. So it's unfortunate that we have to go outside of our own communities in order to receive the information when it should be given to us automatically, but it's not. So within the organization, it's our mission. It's our driving force that ignited us. What happened with my son is to create change, not on a local level, but on a national level, not just in advocacy, but also in awareness and education.
Well, I think that's very much needed. As I said, any of the people who we talk to in situations like this, the African American Wellness Project lives to support projects like yours, and to try to amplify exposure that your foundation gets, and hopefully other children will not suffer the way that you do. Well, I think your story is so compelling that it's bound to really help as many people as we are able to reach. Dr. Renee, you got any final words for this segment?
No, I just wanted you to explain anaphylaxis, but
okay, no, come, let's talk about it. Well, when you have an allergy problem, it's really not an immune deficiency. It's an excess immune response. And what happens is the body makes a chemical to a particular food. Usually it's of a class called IgE, where the two connect, the antibody and the food, let's say for milk. When that happens, There are cells in the body called mast cells. And those mast cells release chemicals, one of the major chemical being histamine. There are probably others. Histamine has several impacts on the body. It causes the vessels to swell, it causes the vessels to leak fluid, and it causes the airways to close down. And if it happens all over the body, probably the first symptom is abdominal pain in many instances, because there are many more arteries and vessels in the abdomen that close down first and constrict. But then it goes on to, in a cascade, to have a skin problem, gastrointestinal problems, respiratory problems, circulatory problems, and then central nervous system issues. What most people don't realize about anaphylaxis, Dr. Renee, is that the most dangerous thing is the third spacing of fluid. Because once the fluid starts third spacing, the blood pressure drops, and it's very difficult to intercede at that point, finding a vein or a vessel to use. The only drug that should be considered in any evidence of anaphylaxis is epinephrine. No Benadryl, no steroids, none of that. I can't tell you how many children have gotten into trouble because Benadryl was the first drug of choice. Your focus on epinephrine is a very vital piece of anything we have to say about food allergy. And so anaphylaxis doesn't occur that often. But if you have a child who has that kind of a problem, then everybody has to be involved in the discussion of what to do if something happens. Because if your child dies from a cheese sandwich, think of what happens when a child gets a glass of milk, or gets an egg, or gets a drug. And so consequently, I've been in those situations where you're trying to establish, intravascular volume, and that's the most dangerous piece. You can deal with the respiratory pieces, you deal with the little skin pieces, but once those vessels start to leak, that's when you have the real problem. So the use of epinephrine and your foundation's focus on that, both nationally and legislatively, is so critical. And we thank you for your efforts, and we're sorry for your loss.
Definitely.
You get that last word.
One last thing is that unfortunately, many people do not know what dairy is. I will tell you that a few years ago, I was one of those people because I know I couldn't have eggs. I didn't realize eggs wasn't dairy. Don't laugh at me. But people don't realize what dairy is. And so I've heard this many times. People are at a restaurant and they tell the waitress, I have a dairy allergy. And then she recommends something with cheese.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing, is that the education needs to be across the board. The lunch ladies, the wait staff, and everyone needs to understand exactly what categories of foods contain what.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the key things is like addressing these challenges requires a multifaceted approach in terms of education and awareness. It's like if we need to educate parents, caregivers, and community members about the seriousness of food allergies and the importance of early diagnosis and proper management, that's what we need to do.
Well, thank you for taking the time, Mr. Silvera, and Dr. Renee. Thank you for joining me each week on the Black Doctor Speak podcast. And thank those of you who've taken the time to listen and spread the word to come back to the podcast and have them listen, especially if they have symptoms that like we described. Always remember that our website is aawellnessproject.org. aawellnessproject.org. Mr. Silvera, you're not a very good promoter of your own foundation. What is your website?
So if you want to find out more about the Elijah Alavi Foundation, you can go to www.elijahalavi.foundation.org, where you get to find out everything that we're doing in terms of legislation, education, and awareness.
And to those of you who've taken the time to listen, always remember, and it sounds kind of corny, but health is your biggest asset. So protect it. We'll talk again next week. Okay, so that gives us 2 programs.